I think it's important for people to understand that even if the judge thinks that this divorce is all your husband's fault or all your wife's fault, the issue of fault is really just one factor that they consider when deciding what is the fair way to divide the assets.
Correct.
They're going to look at how long the people have been married, what's the total asset picture like, what are the incomes of the parties, if the parties have their own like separate assets, all that's going to come into play too.
Welcome to the Herlihy Family Law Podcast, your trusted source for expert insights on navigating family law matters with clarity and care. Whether you're tackling tough decisions or seeking guidance for your family's future, we're here to help. Let's get started.
Welcome back to the Herlihy Family Law Podcast. I'm Alison Herlihy, and today I'm joined by attorney Walter Gewin, who plays a key role here at Herlihy Family Law. Walter handles a wide range of family law matters, from divorce and custody to child support and even some probate. He's known for his thoughtful, client-focused approach. We're excited to have Walter on the podcast to help clear up some of the common myths about family law. Family law is good. Thanks for hopping in.
Yeah.
All the way from the office next door.
Right.
Family law is full of misconceptions, and what you've heard from friends or seen on TV or read on Google isn't always how things work in real life. So in today's episode, we're breaking down several of the most common myths about divorce, custody, and child support, and we're going to set the record straight for you, hopefully. The first myth, and this is myth number one because I think it's the most common question that we get in divorce cases, which is if you move out, you lose your share of the house. Or people say, I can't move out because that's abandonment. Is that something that you hear a lot, Walter?
I hear it all the time. People focus a lot on that. If they move out, they're not going to get any part of the house, or if their name's not on the deed, they're not going to get any part of the house. And that in and of itself is just not conclusive. I mean, a lot more goes into it, but you're right. I mean, I hear that all the time.
Well, and abandonment actually has like a specific statutory definition. It's one of the traditional fault grounds for divorce, like adultery or cruelty. And it's defined in the code as basically you have to fall off the face of the earth for months at a time for the before the divorce for it to legally be considered abandonment under the statute. But, if you're not getting along and you have another place you can go, and it's especially if it's unsafe in the home, that's not going to be held against you if you have to move out.
Absolutely. I mean, I think in today's age, it's not financially feasible for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But I mean, if they can do it and it would be beneficial, for them and dealing with the child or children, I mean, I think it's often great. It's just most people can't do it.
Yeah. And since you brought up the issue of children, it is important to note that when custody of children is at issue, it's generally not a good idea to move out and leave the children at home with the other parent, because then you're basically giving them custody of the kids. Right. So if you move out and leave the children, it makes it a lot harder to turn around later and say, no, they shouldn't have custody. I should have custody. Right. It begs the question, well, then why did you leave them? Why didn't you take them with you? Why didn't you stay with them?
Right.
Yeah. The second myth that we hear a lot too is people think that child support and visitation are contingent on each other, as in if they don't pay child support, I don't have to let them visit, or if they won't let me visit, then that means I don't have to pay child support.
You're right. I see that in divorces and in custody cases and like CS cases between non-married parents. I mean, a lot of people don't send the children if they're not getting paid, and you can't do that. Yeah. You're just putting yourself at risk for being in contempt.
Yeah, I mean, these are completely separate legal obligations. And it's kind of like that old saying we all heard growing up, 2 wrongs don't make a right, right?
Absolutely.
So, I mean,
right. They're just
if one person doesn't pay child support and then the other person withholds visitation in response to that, then they're both in contempt.
Correct.
Right. Yeah. what do you think are some helpful legal remedies if the other person is non-compliant with a court order? What are some options people have?
So, I mean, child support is due the month, like due on the first, late after the end of the month. And so if it's not paid by the end of the month, it's technically a judgment that could be then garnished, or you could file a lien. Or you could file a motion for contempt, which would be the same thing you could do if they were withholding visitation. You could file a motion for contempt with the court, whether that be, a short amount of time that's being withheld, or if it's just a pattern and they have, a calendar of dates where they haven't been allowed to see their children. And I guess depending on what happened and how severe it is, I mean, it could be, grounds to change custody.
Well, not withholding child support, right?
No. I was talking about withholding
support.
the children.
Yeah.
Right.
There is some case authority that talks about that disputes over visitation aren't sufficient to change custody, but you're obviously referring to something that rises to a much higher level than that.
Right. Like way beyond.
Yeah. And what are some of the common sanctions that are available for contempt?
So, if you filed a contempt about child support, you could get a judgment, from the court, which you could also have without going to court, just because it's due by the end of the month. Otherwise, it's a judgment. You could get, if you filed a contempt from the children being withheld, you could get makeup visitation. So like if you had a lot of time withheld, you might get the children, X amount of time, and then you would go back to the normal schedule.
Attorney's fees are also a common sanction for contempt that we see.
Absolutely. I mean, if the only reason you're coming back for court is contempt, I mean, you've got a pretty good argument to try to get attorney's fees, if not the whole amount, maybe you could at least get a reasonable attorney's fee judgment.
Yeah. Incarceration is a possible sanction for contempt, but I would say, in my opinion, that's one that you almost never see. It's extremely rarely utilized. Would you agree with that?
I think you see it threatened, but you don't normally see it enforced.
Yeah. One of the next biggest myths that we hear is that if your spouse cheats, that means you get everything automatically in the divorce.
Oh, I hear it all the time. I mean, I'm not trying to make light of this, but it is people put a lot more weight on this than we have found. Judges, tend to find it when they issue their ruling. It doesn't typically affect the division of assets or liabilities like you either would think it would or you might want it to.
Yeah. I think it's important for people to understand that even if the judge thinks that this divorce is all your husband's fault or all your wife's fault, the issue of fault is really just one factor that they consider when deciding what is the fair way to divide the assets.
Correct.
They're going to look at how long the people have been married, what's the total asset picture like, what are the incomes of the parties, if the parties have their own like separate assets, all that's going to come into play too. So, just the fault is not, the whole case is not going to rise and fall on that one issue.
I totally agree. I think that there are a lot of people out there that have either seen a movie or a friend has told them that, the other person should get nothing. But I mean, the truth is nobody's being left homeless. No one's receiving nothing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, nobody's going to have to go live in a cardboard box under the interstate.
Correct.
And by the same token, it's not, if your spouse has an affair, it's not like you won the lottery and you're going to get more assets than y'all even have.
Right.
I think that's another misconception people have too, is that they'll almost be like a punitive damages award if that happens. But, you're still getting all of your financial assets of your marriage are the pie, and you're still getting part of that pie, not more than the pie.
Correct. And then people also tend to think that just because something happened that that they don't have to, participate in discovery in the legal process. But I mean, everyone has to do that regardless of the allegations and what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think people think too that if adultery is involved, that automatically means the guilty party has to pay all the attorney's fees.
Right.
Which might happen, but often does not happen.
Correct.
Yeah. Another myth that we hear a lot of times is that, especially if people have multiple children, that you can automatically reduce your child support if one of the children turns 18.
Right. Oh, I mean, I can't tell you how many times we've had it where they, like you said, they have two children, one ages out, and they just cut it in half, and they make half payments to the spouse for years sometimes. And the problem is child support's a formula. It's not that easy, and by doing that you're risking owing a lot of money in past due child support and accumulating a lot of interest.
Yeah, because like you were explaining earlier, those payments are automatic judgments against you the month that they're due.
Right.
And so if you just make partial payments per your prior court order, everything you haven't paid is automatically ticking up interest.
Right.
It's also important to note that people think 18 is the magic age, but here in Alabama, the age of majority is 19.
Correct.
Yeah. I think a lot of people don't know that.
A lot of people don't.
One key exception to that rule too, though, is if you have a child who's permanently disabled, and you can actually be ordered to pay child support when they are an adult, provided that the disability occurred when they were a child. So that's something we've seen a lot more in recent years as autism diagnoses have become more prevalent and more understood. That's something that's a lot more common. But if you have a child who, say they're a teenager when you're getting divorced and they can't do their activities of daily life themselves, like they can't feed themselves, dress themselves, they don't know to call 911 if there's an emergency, then you might be looking at child support, permanent child support.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely.
The next myth is that social drinking or occasional cannabis use automatically leads to a loss of custody.
You're absolutely. I feel like there's some gray area here, especially with marijuana usage. But I mean, I have never seen someone that uses marijuana lose custody in and of itself. Now,
Just because of that.
Just because of that. I mean, I think obviously if you have one parent that is positive and the other is not, then I mean, how much weight is given to that? I mean, I think it depends on the judge, but yet again, I still think it's going to be minimal.
Even though marijuana is of course still illegal in the state of Alabama, I think it's widely not considered to be as dangerous of a drug compared to other drugs like, cocaine or opiates or methamphetamine, where you see much more obvious harm to children.
Absolutely.
Especially if you have a situation where the children aren't exposed to the marijuana use.
Correct.
You're going to have a hard time making a case that somebody should lose custody only because of that.
Right. Well, and often I feel like one of the parents probably used during the marriage or during the relationship. So then, to try to impute that against them, it's just less compelling.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things like, okay, well, you were okay with it last month, but you're not okay with it today. That's right. Going to be hard to get a judge to understand that.
I think so.
Yeah. And then, I mean, with alcohol use, that's kind of its own beast, because alcohol is, of course, not illegal. It's perfectly legal to drink alcohol. So if someone takes, say, a fingernail test and they test positive for alcohol, well, what does that mean exactly?
Right. Well, at that point, it's going to be all about the levels and, and what those levels indicate. But I think yet again, that alone, without some corroborating concerns, is not as strong of a case,
Yeah.
but it's more than nothing, obviously. But I think,
Mhm.
if that were it, you probably need some, an expert to come to court or some way to kind of indicate how bad it is. But
Yeah, I mean, like if you have
right,
other facts or circumstances which indicate that the drinking is dangerous to the child,
right,
like say the person's gotten multiple DUIs or, I mean, we've had actually this happen more than once in cases where people show up to pick their children up from school and they're drunk.
absolutely.
I mean, I never thought I would see that happen, but it's happened more than once.
It has,
Um,
and surprises me every time.
Yeah. So, I mean,
Yeah,
things like that, I mean, that's a no brainer. That's a dangerous situation for the child. That's going to be a big
for
deal,
sure. I mean,
but
yeah, high levels, danger concerns,
right.
maybe an arrest. I mean, obviously that goes hand in hand.
Yeah. Next myth, we were talking about adultery a minute ago. A lot of people have the idea that if somebody commits adultery, it automatically means they're going to lose custody.
Right. I think, I guess this is like due to maybe the way things used to be a long time ago and movies. I mean, people think adultery is you're getting nothing, you'll never see the kids again.
Yeah.
But
Well,
it's just not
I
that.
think it's important to understand that you can be a bad spouse and not necessarily also be a bad parent.
Right.
You know,
Absolutely.
I mean, nobody thinks adultery is good, but that doesn't automatically mean you're a bad parent.
Right. I mean, people,
And I think the really important distinction is just kind of like we were talking about with alcohol use and marijuana use, like is that behavior impacting the child somehow? So, I mean, like, if you're having an affair with somebody that's a convicted felon or a child molester and you're bringing your children around this dangerous person,
right.
that's a whole different ball game than if
Absolutely.
somebody's had an affair and the children have never even met the person, don't know anything about the person, don't even know
Right.
the person exists.
Right. Right. I mean, at that point, it's just, okay, so y'all's marriage isn't working, but this kid is not being affected and is just fine and not in danger.
Yeah, I mean, because the paramount consideration when a court is deciding custody is what's in the child's best interest.
Right.
I mean, that's what everything boils down to. And if you can't make the case that something's actually impacted the child, then it's probably not going to impact the custody decision. Don't you agree?
I do.
Next myth related to that is whoever gets custody automatically keeps the house.
Right. People put a lot of weight on keeping the house. I mean, a lot of people want to keep the house and maybe it's really not the best decision for them financially. Also, a lot of people want everything to stay the same and the kid will be in the house and, they'll never know we're getting divorced. Well, I mean, that's just all not true, so I think the thought that, you're going to continue on the same life is just not true. I mean, you're going to be divorced. And so, one person, that has custody is not guaranteed to get the house.
Yeah, and I do. We both do a lot of work as guardian ad litems too, and I think I have found, and with all the children I've talked to and represented over the years, that children often know a lot more than their parents think they know.
Absolutely, I totally agree. I mean, people can think, okay, well, we'll stay in the house, and then I'll leave when it's your time, and you'll come in, and that'll solve everything. But I mean, that is just a dream. That is not. They're going to know. It's going to be different. Yeah. A house is a structure.
Well, and the court has the responsibility to equitably divide the marital assets. And for your average person, your house is probably your biggest marital asset. And so if you want to keep the house, really the only way you're going to be able to keep it is if you can buy the other person out of their part of the equity.
Absolutely.
And if you're not in a financial position to do that, it's going to be impossible for you to keep the house.
Right.
And related to that is, most people probably their mortgage is in joint names. Mm-hmm. And there's not going to be a fact situation where the judge lets, spouse A keep a property with a mortgage that has spouse B's name on it. Right. So if you want to keep the house, you're going to have to be able to refinance to remove your spouse's name from the mortgage. And if you don't have an income that can support that, or your debt to income ratio's out of whack and you can't get approved, then that simply isn't going to be an option for you.
Right. Well, and I feel like the best divorces are going to be the ones where both parties can move on and not be entangled. And then also, I mean, I think a lot of people don't want to remain in the home where their marriage, did not work.
Yeah.
But some do. But yeah.
Some definitely do. Yeah. I mean, they associate it with the memories of the Christmases and the Thanksgivings and all those good things. But yeah, I think there's a lot of value in a fresh start.
I think so too.
For sure. The next myth a lot of people think is that you can force your spouse to pay all of your attorney's fees up front.
Right.
Yeah.
They think that all the time. You're right. I mean, I kind of look at it like I never go into a case expecting attorney's fees to be awarded. I mean, I think that if you do, you'll almost always be disappointed, especially in a divorce where each party is getting divorced and they're going to get a division of assets and debts. The only time that I would, think it's likely is when one parent hasn't worked for a long time.
Yeah, if you have situations where there's like an enormous income differential
Right.
between the parties, or if you have situations where one person's fault is really egregious,
Right.
that can come into play with attorney's fees. Or if somebody engages in really bad behavior during the litigation itself,
Right.
like, what we typically do in divorce cases or any civil case, you do discovery,
Right.
which is asking for information from the other side that you need to prepare your case. And if the other side refuses to comply with discovery, that's a really typical sanction that we'll see in our court is they'll make the other side pay some part of the attorney's fees because of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think very rarely is it going to be dollar for dollar or as much as you think. But
yeah. And if attorney's fees are awarded, it's usually the client is getting reimbursed on the back end.
Right.
They're not getting ordered to pay attorney's fees like up front.
Right.
Even though there is some statutory authority to ask for that, but that's, it's atypical in my opinion.
I agree.
Next myth, if your spouse sees a therapist, they will lose custody.
Right. I think therapy gets a bad rap in divorces. But the fact is therapy is needed. I mean, people that need help and need therapy, they should get it and not be concerned about it coming back up in the divorce.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are worried about it being held against them, which, your records with your therapist can potentially be subpoenaed if custody is an issue in your case, because even though, yes, they are confidential, yes, they are privileged, our law provides that there's an exception to that privilege when custody of children is at issue, because like we said earlier, the best interest of the children is what's paramount. So, I mean, it can come up, it can be used, but yeah, I would say, 9 times out of 10, if you're getting help, most courts are going to think that's a good thing.
Absolutely. Well, and I think the chances of something, being in there that is, says that you can't have the children is rare unless, serious mental illness is involved or something like that.
Yeah. If we're talking about a severe enough mental illness that you're a danger to yourself or to others, then that certainly is going to impact the custody case, as it should.
Absolutely.
If you're violent or you can't take care of yourself, then obviously you can't take care of children.
Right.
But for your average person who's going to get help just dealing with, getting divorced is hard.
Right.
And if you need a professional to help you get through that and process all these changes, that's nothing to be ashamed of.
Right. Depression, anxiety, things like that, I would say are common in almost every divorce.
Yeah. Next myth, this is kind of related to what we talked about earlier, but I can get more money because my ex is a jerk.
Right. Yeah. A lot of people are out there looking for money and they think, oh God, he's a jerk. He's a narcissist. But that in and of itself is not enough. And also a narcissist is, very, very thrown around and not actually used in context. But no,
well, I mean, I think most people that are getting divorced probably think the person that they're getting divorced from is not the nicest person. Otherwise, they wouldn't be getting divorced, right?
Absolutely, right.
And likewise, your spouse that you're getting divorced from probably has some bad things to say about you too.
Absolutely. Well, I think you're looking at a snapshot of somebody, in court dealing with them, their answers. I mean, that's obviously not totally them.
Well, and like we touched on earlier, the asset division you're going to see in court is based on what you actually have.
Right.
You're not getting punitive damages in divorce court to like punish the bad person.
Right.
You're going to get a fair proportion of what exists. Right. A lot of times that's half. If the judge thinks the other person is really bad, you might get more than half.
Right.
But you're not getting 100% or more than 100%.
Right.
No matter
right.
how bad the other person is.
Correct. You're not getting 110% of someone's monthly income.
Right.
Never going to happen.
The next myth, this is a really, really common one too in the custody area, is that my child can choose who to live with at a certain age.
Right.
Yeah. The most common age I hear probably is people seem to think that 14 is the magic age where children get to decide, if they go visit dad or whether they have to keep living with mom. Is that an age you hear a lot?
I was thinking when you were saying that 14. Absolutely. I think everyone thinks, okay, that, they're a teenager, they're almost about to be, practicing to drive. 14-year-olds get to choose. And no, they don't. Minors don't get to choose or make decisions.
Yeah. And there are some states where that is the law, but Alabama is not one of them.
Correct.
And that's where we are. So what the law says in Alabama is that if the child is of sufficient age and maturity, that the child's wishes are just a factor that the court can consider amongst all the factors that the court considers, like the fitness of the parents, etc.
Right.
And what is sufficient age and maturity, that depends on the child. I mean, I've met some 8-year-olds that are more mature than some 16-year-olds.
Absolutely. And I think people want to simultaneously parentify the children and give them opinions and then also treat them like children. And there's a reason you can't do that. They are children. They don't get to choose. They're easily persuaded. Their brains aren't fully developed.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's true.
Well, and you're a parent, you know how it goes, right?
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah, they both can be very compelling and just yeah.
And so the last one that we'll touch on is people think that the court is going to take affirmative steps to make sure that you or your ex follow the custody or support order or other court orders. And once your case is over, your case is over. There's not going to be anybody knocking on your door to make sure that you're going by the visitation schedule or make sure the other person's paying what they're supposed to pay or anything like that. So if someone is not complying with a court order, then if you want to enforce it, then the burden's on you to file a motion for contempt and take them back to court or take some other affirmative action to enforce the order. There's not like a divorce court police coming around to check and see what everybody's doing.
I'm always surprised at the amount of people that have not read their order. I mean, to me, that if you were divorced or went to custody court, your most important document would be your final order, and you would have it in the car. You probably have it on your phone. You'd have it in your house, and you would just refer to it constantly. Now obviously in most orders, it's going to, also be as you otherwise agree. And then I would say, you need to do that in writing, with the other person. And then if something comes up, great, you have proof. But it truly is amazing the amount of people that have not read it and then also, are opinionated about why it's not being followed and the other person should be responsible. But
Well,
And
and to your point, Walter, I mean, I've met with quite a few clients over the years who we didn't handle their initial case, some other lawyer did, and they come in here about an enforcement issue and they don't even have a copy of their court order.
right. I mean, I'm amazed how that happens, unless maybe you're dealing with two people that really get along well and have kind of not gone by it at all. But then, I mean, that's great until there's a problem. And when there's a
Yeah.
problem, everybody looks and goes back to that order because that's what you can enforce.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, I think this has been a good conversation. I mean, I hope that this clears up some of those misconceptions that a lot of people have. And thanks, Walter, for joining me today and helping debunk some of the most common myths that we see in our family law cases. To our listeners, if you're facing a legal issue and you're not sure what to believe, don't rely on rumors. You need to reach out to a qualified attorney for actual legal advice. Not what you've heard down the street and not what you've read on Google or an AI chatbot either.
I mean, people do that all the time. I mean, you're putting yourself at risk to be held accountable for, what someone told you in another state or what they heard, and I think it's best. Why not spend the time and a little bit of money, get some advice?
Yeah. Well, for more information or to schedule a consultation, you can visit us at www.herlihyfamilylaw.com. And until next time.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you for tuning in to the Herlihy Family Law Podcast. Remember, you don't have to face family law challenges alone. Visit herlihyfamilylaw.com or call 251-432-7909 to learn more.